In the autumn of 2008, a 23-year-old hiker named Ethan Miller disappeared while exploring a section of Pine Ridge National Forest. The weather was clear. The trails were open, and according to everyone who knew him, Ethan was experienced enough to handle a routine day hike alone. He packed food, water, a flashlight, a map, and a handheld radio that could connect directly to local ranger frequencies. At approximately 8:14 p.m., long after he should have returned to his vehicle, park rangers received a distress call. At first, there was nothing unusual about it. Lost hikers are not uncommon. People misread maps. They wander off marked trails. They panic after sunset. The first transmission sounded exactly like dozens of other emergency calls received every year. No one listening could have predicted what would follow, or why. 18 years later, park staff still refuse to discuss the recordings after dark. This is the story of the missing hiker's radio. At 8:14 p.m., Ranger Channel 3 recorded Ethan's first transmission. His voice sounded nervous, but controlled. He reported that his GPS had stopped functioning roughly an hour earlier. He claimed that he could no longer locate trail markers. Most importantly, he believed he was somewhere near the northern ridge. Search coordinators immediately began checking maps and preparing teams. Then Ethan casually mentioned something strange. He told the dispatcher that he could see another person walking ahead of him. At first, this wasn't considered unusual. Another hiker might have been nearby. The dispatcher instructed Ethan to call out and attempt to make contact. Ethan agreed.
The transmission ended. 23 minutes later, he called again. This time, something had changed. His breathing was heavier, his voice was strained, and he sounded genuinely confused. According to Ethan, the person ahead of him had been visible the entire time. However, they had never once turned around. They never responded to his shouts. They never acknowledged his presence. Even stranger, they remained the exact same distance away, no matter how fast he walked. Imagine seeing someone on a trail. Imagine following them for nearly half an hour. Now imagine that no matter how much ground you cover, they never become closer, not by a single step. Toward the end of the transmission, Ethan made a statement that investigators later highlighted in their report. He said, "I don't think they're walking." Then, the radio went silent. Search teams officially entered the forest shortly afterward. Unfortunately, they encountered a major problem almost immediately. The location Ethan described didn't match his radio signal. Technicians attempted to triangulate the source of the transmission. The results made no sense. Each reading placed him somewhere different. Sometimes the signal appeared near the northern ridge. Other times it seemed to originate miles deeper in the forest. One reading suggested the radio was transmitting from a location beyond a steep canyon that Ethan could not have reached on foot in the available time. Engineers initially blamed equipment malfunction, but then the third transmission arrived, and things became much harder to explain. At 9:02 p.m., Ethan contacted Ranger Channel 3 again. The recording begins with nearly 15 seconds of silence. Then he speaks. His voice is quieter than before. He sounds frightened. Ethan explains that he stopped walking 10 minutes earlier. He had remained completely still. Yet somehow the figure ahead of him continued moving farther away. That alone would be disturbing. But what happened next is the reason the recording became infamous. While Ethan is speaking, another voice can be heard in the distance. The audio quality is poor. The words are faint.
But after extensive analysis, investigators reached a consensus regarding what the voice says. It says, "Hello?" Ethan immediately stops talking. Several seconds pass. Then the voice repeats itself. This time, closer. "Hello." According to the official transcript, Ethan whispers words that would later appear in every report connected to the case. "That's me." He believed the voice belonged to him, not someone who sounded similar, not a trick of the radio. Him, his exact voice, calling from somewhere in the darkness. Rangers attempted to reassure Ethan. They told him that echoes, terrain distortion, and signal interference could create unusual sounds. Privately, however, the dispatcher handling the call later admitted she did not believe that explanation. She stated that Ethan sounded genuinely terrified. Not confused, not emotional. Terrified. At 9:26 p.m., another transmission arrived. This recording remains one of the most unsettling pieces of audio preserved in the Pine Ridge archives. The call begins with the sound of branches breaking nearby. Ethan is whispering. He says something is moving around him. He claims that every time he points his flashlight toward a tree, the figure appears somewhere else. Not walking, not running, appearing. He says he never actually sees it move, only that its position changes whenever he looks away. Then the recording captures something unexpected. A second voice, clearer than before, close to the microphone. The voice says, "Don't turn around." The dispatcher immediately responds. She asks Ethan if he heard another person. Ethan asks if the dispatcher spoke. She says no. The voice was not transmitted from the ranger station. No one else was broadcasting on the frequency. Yet the words remain present on the recording. Investigators later enhanced the audio. The conclusion only deepened the mystery. The voice matched Ethan's vocal patterns with unusual accuracy. Not perfectly, but disturbingly close. As if someone had spent years practicing how to sound like him. The next transmission occurred at 10:01 p.m. By this point, rain had begun falling across sections of the forest. Signal quality was deteriorating rapidly. Ethan sounded exhausted, disoriented. At several points, he seemed unsure whether he was speaking aloud or simply thinking. Then he reported finding something impossible. A radio tower. Not a cell tower. A massive metal communications tower rising from the trees. He described rusted support beams disappearing into the darkness above him. The dispatcher checked every available map. There was no tower, no abandoned structure, no utility installation anywhere near Ethan's supposed location. The area had never contained one. Then Ethan noticed something carved into the metal. Names. Hundreds of names. Possibly thousands. According to the recording, he began reading some aloud. Most were ordinary. First names, last names, dates. Then his voice suddenly changed.
He stopped reading.
Several seconds passed. Finally, he spoke again. He said some of the dates hadn't happened yet. Future dates. Years that had not arrived. No one at the ranger station knew how to respond. At 10:33 p.m., Ethan transmitted for what many believed would be the final time. The recording is heavily corrupted. Large sections are unintelligible. What remains is deeply unsettling.
Ethan states that he has climbed the tower. He claims something is standing below, watching him, looking up. He repeatedly says he cannot see its face. Then he makes a strange correction. He says, "I don't think it has one." Metal rattles violently in the background. A ladder shakes. Wind roars through the microphone. Then Ethan screams. The transmission cuts out,
Returns once more. And during the final seconds, another voice becomes audible. Unlike the previous recordings, this voice does not sound human. Its tone is wrong. The words stretch unnaturally, as though multiple speakers are talking at the same time. The voice says only two words: "Come down." The final transmission arrived 8 minutes later, 10:41 p.m. Search teams were already deep inside the forest. They never reached the source. The recording begins with heavy wind. Then Ethan speaks. His voice sounds distant, detached, almost peaceful. He says, "They're all here." A burst of static follows. Then another sentence. "The names." More static. Another pause. "They're climbing." What happened afterward remains unclear. The signal deteriorates into noise. Fragments of words appear and vanish. The dispatcher later claimed Ethan was trying to say something important, some kind of warning, but the message never came through. The transmission breaks, returns briefly, and Ethan speaks one final time. His voice is calm, far calmer than at any previous point in the night. He says, "I found the trail." A pause. Then, "I'm almost home." The radio falls silent.
Search operations continued for 12 days. No trace of Ethan Miller was ever discovered. No campsite, no equipment, no clothing, no remains. Nothing. Investigators also searched for the mysterious tower described in the recordings. It was never found. Helicopters found nothing. Survey teams found nothing. Historical records showed nothing. Officially, the structure did not exist. The case might have ended there. Just another unsolved disappearance. But one final detail continues to disturb those familiar with the recordings. 3 weeks after Ethan vanished, Ranger Channel 3 received an unexpected transmission. The message lasted less than 6 seconds. The voice was immediately recognized. It belonged to Ethan. The recording contains only one sentence. "Has anyone seen the man ahead of me?" Then silence. No signal origin was identified, and no further messages were ever received. At least, none that were officially documented. To this day, some former employees claim that Channel 3 occasionally produces brief bursts of static during the month of September. Most dismiss it as equipment interference. Others disagree. According to those individuals, if you listen carefully, you can sometimes hear footsteps beneath the noise, and very faintly, a voice calling from somewhere deep in the dark, trying to catch up with someone walking just ahead.